Have you ever encountered a friend, family member, maybe a coworker who was experiencing emotional distress, but you wanted to help, but you didn't know what to do? So you just did what came naturally, and sometimes it may have worked out okay. Other times you may have been surprised that it actually seemed to make things worse. People got angry at you. And then you looked for a verbal Hail Mary, but you just were not able to find it. Well, here's the good news. Our science has taught us that there is something called psychological crisis intervention. It's a system for helping people in acute emotional distress. Hi, I'm Dr. George Everly. This presentation is about psychological crisis intervention, but a specific model called the SAFER model, with two R's, SAFER-R. It's an acronym. Just helps you remember the steps in the model. Now, this model is based on work that goes back quite some time. In 1954, for example, the American Psychiatric Association said all disaster workers needed to have some sense of psychological reactions to crisis and means of helping people who are in acute crisis. Some years later, the Institute of Medicine and the World Health Organization, the United Nations, the American Red Cross also weighed in on the topic, and they said psychological crisis intervention is an important addition to the total continuum of care. But rather than just do what comes naturally, there is value in following principles that are research-derived and principles that have been used for literally decades. There's actually some research that suggests that not only is psychological crisis intervention effective for fostering human resilience, that is, helping people bounce back from adversity, there's also some research that says that perhaps psychological crisis intervention can be more effective than counseling and psychotherapy in the acute phase after a critical incident or disaster. Now, the current model, the SAFER model, was developed in the 1990s. It was based on some research and empirical evidence generated actually as far back as World War I. Think of it as a form of psychological first aid. Again, not counseling, not psychotherapy. Over 500,000 people worldwide have been trained in this particular model. So it's safe to say this may be one of the most widely used models of psychological crisis intervention in the world. The principles I mentioned earlier that date back to World War I were the PIE principles, P-I-E, proximity, immediacy, and expectancy. And those principles are very simple. They simply mean proximity. We go to you. You don't have to necessarily come to us. We do this work in the field, not necessarily in the hospital, the clinic, or the private practice office. Immediacy. We'll provide these services 24/7 whenever there is a need. And expectancy. Expectancy views this not from a psychologically pathological sense, but more from an adjustment point of view. In other words, we're really fostering resilience rather than treating pathology. The goals are pretty simple. We want to stabilize crisis reactions so they don't get worse. We want to try to make them a little bit better. And if necessary, we want to facilitate access to the next level of care. So what I'd like to do is just walk through the acronym SAFER. We'll talk about its 5 stages, and we'll talk about the goals and some simple do's and don'ts. And as part of this presentation, you will be watching a video where each stage will be demonstrated. And I think it would be important for you to listen to some of the do's and don'ts and see if you can find them in the video. So let's start. The first stage, stabilization. This is pretty simple, I think. You introduce yourself. I think that's important. Who you are, why you're there, what you're doing. You may even say something about yourself in terms of your credibility to do what you're doing. Set expectations for the encounter. People are stressed out. You're new to the scene. They're thinking, who are you and what are you doing and what are you doing with me? Talk about limitations to the relationship. For the most part, we believe these interactions should be confidential. There are exceptions to that rule. When someone's safety is at risk, or perhaps the safety of someone else is at risk, then we will not hold that information in confidence. One of the things that comes along with stabilization is trying to assess the presence of provocative cues. It may not be a good idea to do interventions in the field unless you have to, if the field is replete with distractions. One thing you should keep in mind is generally the average intervention lasts 15 to 20 minutes, maybe as long as 30. But you don't want to turn this into a counseling session. And don't get caught up in the situation. Remember, the antidote for stress is having a calm, reassuring presence. So let's take a look at a demonstration, a reenactment of an actual situation where the stabilization phase is demonstrated. Hi, Annie. I'm George. I'm with the Department of Public Safety's Crisis Response Team. Your supervisor gave me a call. She asked me to spend some time with you today. I actually was going to go down to the beach, but I thought that might be a little too distracting. So thanks for coming in. Your supervisor said you had a difficult week last week.
Oh, well, that's an understatement.
Well, I'd like to help you with it if I can. Would that be okay?
Okay. But I don't know what you can do. It's over. It's done. There are no do-overs. I'm just stuck.
Well, how about this? How about if we have a conversation? Let's just have a chat today. And if I can help you, I will. And if I can't, I promise I'll try to find you the help that you might need. But I do have to let you know up front that what we say is confidential. So I'm not going back to your supervisor. There are two exceptions to that rule. One is if you tell me your safety is at risk, or if you tell me the safety of someone else is at risk, then that I do have to report. Is that okay with you?
Okay.
So what'd you think? Were you able to find the elements I described earlier in that demonstration? I hope so. Let's move on to the second phase, acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is really where the person tells you their story. The story consists of two things: what happened and their reactions to what happened. Now, don't delve too deeply. Don't have the person relive in painful detail the incident, but you weren't there. So it's nice to have a context, but what you really focus on is their reactions to the incident. So do be present, do listen, do use your active listening techniques to establish rapport. Remember those empathic responses, but don't delve too deeply. Don't open a door you can't close. Don't minimize and dismiss a person's concerns. You may hear something that you say, really? Is that a problem? If they say it is, then it is. It's not about you. It's about them. And remember the WAIT principle. That too is an acronym. W-A-I-T. Why am I talking? If you don't know why you're about to say something, maybe you shouldn't say it. So let's take a look as our scenario continues. And this is the acknowledgement phase. See if you can pick apart in the scenario the event and reactions to the event. And what I want you to be doing is listening, trying to determine how bad is this. And you'll also notice that one way to really drill down that you'll see in the video is asking a really potent question. And that question is, given all that you've experienced, what was the worst part of it? You'd be surprised where that question will take you. So let's listen. Okay, So let's get started. Why don't you tell me about the last week? Now, I don't want you to get into finite detail. You don't have to relive it. But I wasn't there. So I need a context.
Did my supervisor tell you anything?
Well, she did. She shared her perspective. But I'd really like to hear your perspective on things.
Okay, well, it should be pretty simple. It's exactly what I told my supervisor. Last Wednesday, I did my usual shift at the beach. It was beautiful. Temperature was perfect. Ocean was calm. So a lot of people were out. You know, people were swimming 100, 200 yards off the beach because it was so crowded. Everything was fine until noon, when I heard a woman screaming for help. I came down from the tower. She said she and her friend were swimming and they bumped into a shark. So I blew the whistle, ordering everyone to come to shore. That took like less than a minute. Then I took my rowboat, put it in the surf, rowed out toward the woman. Probably halfway there, I saw a huge dorsal fin. I mean, this thing was probably the size of a submarine. I didn't know what to do. I stopped rowing for a minute. Then I decided to row back to shore and call the Coast Guard. They were 3 minutes down the beach. But they arrived too late. She'd been bitten and died from blood loss.
Well, I'm sorry you had to go through all that. Hey, let's change gears for a little bit. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm 27. I live with a roommate 4 blocks from the beach. I study marine biology in college. You know, I love the outdoors and the sea, and this seemed like a perfect job.
Sounds like you really like what you do. But you did say earlier you were stuck. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's been a week since the shark attack, and I'm not myself.
Not yourself. What does that mean?
Normally, I'm eager and happy to go to my job. I love helping people. I made a mistake. I should have helped her, and I didn't.
Sounds like you're doing some second guessing.
Well, of course. A woman died.
And how are you feeling about that now?
I feel sad. I feel guilty for not helping her. I made a mistake. I think I should quit. Someone died because of me.
When you say sad, what do you mean?
I'm down. I don't have an appetite. I'm not sleeping well.
When you say you're not sleeping well, are you having trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or maybe both?
Mostly staying asleep. I wake up at 3 a.m., stay awake for 30 minutes, and then fall back asleep.
So you're a week out from the incident. As you look back, can you tell me what the worst part of this whole thing has been?
I hear her scream for help 10, 20 times a day when I have nothing to occupy myself.
So when you hear these screams, are they memories or do they sound real at the time?
No, it's just a memory. A really bad memory that I can't turn off.
Kind of like an unwanted instant replay that just won't shut off.
Right. I just want it to end.
Any morbid thoughts?
Not really. I didn't see the body.
How about morbid personal thoughts?
What do you mean?
Have you had any thoughts about hurting yourself, or have you had any thoughts about ending your life?
Sometimes I wish I had been attacked instead of her. But I would never hurt myself. I don't think it's right. I would never do that to my family, no matter how bad it got.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Hey, I hear the beach is reopened and you're back at work. What's that like?
Fine, actually. Better. I don't seem to take things for granted. My supervisors actually said they were going to write in some things in the guidelines in case something like this should ever happen again.
How about at home? How are things going at home?
It's okay. Other than my lack of enthusiasm and energy, I don't feel like going out with my friends.
Well, I know this has been tough, but it sounds like you're a pretty strong woman.
Thanks.
The third phase of the SAFER model is facilitation of understanding. Sometimes we try normalization as a tactic within that phase. The goal is very simple. You must integrate everything you've heard about the incident and the reactions. And you're really setting up two columns in your mind's eye. One column is, yeah, I understand those reactions. Those are pretty normal. Those are to be expected. And in the other column, you're saying, those are ones we don't typically see. Those are ones that I have concern about. So in terms of do's and don'ts, do normalize the reactions that you can. Don't normalize reactions that are of concern. Don't overreact. Don't be dismissive. Don't underreact. Do provide some explanatory guidance. What do I mean by that? A lot of people really just want to know, why does this one bother me? You'll often hear people, especially in emergency services, military, say, I've seen worse things, but they didn't bother me. This one bothers me. Why? They're concerned about their careers. They're sometimes concerned about losing their mind, whatever that means to them. In reality, people may have seen things that were more gruesome, but they may not have seen things that were more moving to them personally on a psychological level. So, after hearing the story, a prompt you might use is, well, thanks for telling me what's going on. I'd like to give you some feedback, if that's okay. So let's return to our scenario and let's see what happens. Let's see what the facilitation stage looks like in our ongoing story. Annie, thanks for sharing. I know that wasn't easy. You're probably wondering, though, what my reactions to what you said might be. Would you like some feedback?
Sure.
Well, I'm hearing several things going on. First of all, I hear some mild depression. I hear a lot of self-doubt, blaming, maybe even some guilt. And I also heard the part when I asked you about what was worst, about the replaying, the screaming, just over and over and over again. And I know this is really uncomfortable, and I know it's distressing, and I'm not dismissing what you're saying, but what you need to hear is your reactions are pretty normal. I haven't heard anything that is of major concern. So as tough as it may be, you need to hear this is a pretty normal trajectory after an event like you've experienced.
Even the memories?
Even the memories. It's kind of interesting. The mind, when faced with a terrible thing, life-threatening thing, often takes the images or the sounds or both and plays them over and over and over again. And it may not make a lot of sense, but it's actually protective. It keeps playing them over again until it, finds a solution, or decides maybe there is no solution, and it just decides to move on. So, yeah, it's uncomfortable, but it's pretty much what we'd expect. Okay, so now we're ready for the fourth phase, the encourage effective coping, which is really a way of saying we're looking for an intervention to use in this situation. The goal, to mitigate acute distress. It is not to solve the problem. It is not to treat them. It is not to cure them. It is to mitigate the acute distress or dysfunction. You might begin by saying, "How can I help? What do you need from me right now?" Or you might even say, "In the past, when you've had stressful experiences, what have you done?" Do respond as best you can to mitigate the acute distress, but keep in mind that you don't have to cure people. Do encourage delaying life-changing events. We know that people make bad decisions when they're stressed. By virtue of the fact that you're doing this crisis intervention, it's highly likely that this person is experiencing unusual stress, and they're therefore likely to make bad decisions. Rather than argue with them, simply vote for a delay. What that strategy also does is gives them a sense of control. They just don't have to exercise it. Do instill hope as best you can. Don't try to solve complex problems with simple solutions. And don't use some preconceived notion of what would work for you must work for them. Don't make promises you can't keep. Oh, and be sure not to get into the operational details, operational critiques. This is a common mistake in emergency service, military, and specialized industrial personnel. So let's return to our scenario, and let's see what the interventionist chooses to do. So much earlier in our conversation, you had mentioned that you were stuck. Is there anything that you can think of that I might be able to help you with now?
Well, sometimes just talking is helpful. But I don't know what you can do. I made a mistake and someone died because I made that mistake.
So my guess is you've never experienced anything quite this stressful, but I'm sure you've had stressful events in your life before. What kind of things have you done to feel a little better after such events?
I like early morning swims. They seem to clear my head, but lately not so much. I also like to hang out with friends. But lately I haven't been doing that because they don't understand the situation.
So the things that normally worked for you don't seem to be working anymore.
Right.
Well, how about this? How about if I make some suggestions? And again, I'm not trying to be dismissive. I'm not trying to solve a complicated problem with a simple solution. I really want to give you some things to think about. And I guess the first thing I want to say is earlier you had mentioned you were thinking about quitting your job. I guess that's an option. What I would urge you to do, however, is delay making a final decision on that. We tend to make bad decisions when we're stressed out, and this is a stressful time for you. So that's maybe an issue you want to revisit. Second thing I'd suggest is maybe, hobbies. Maybe revisiting the idea of exercise, maybe a different type of exercise this time. I don't know. What we do know is, left to its own devices, the mind tends to turn negative and worry a lot. So is there anything you can do to keep busy? But there's one other thing I want you to think about, and this may be the most important. You're doing a lot of blame. You're doing a guilt trip on yourself. You're certainly doing a lot of second guessing. I want you to think about something. When people go into the ocean, it's not their element. It's really a dangerous place. Now, I know we don't tell people it's a dangerous place, typically, but it is a dangerous place. You swim in shark-infested waters. There's a chance, small, but there's a chance, that you're going to meet a shark. It seems to me that the job of the lifeguard is to reduce risk of harm. But it also seems to me it's impossible to eliminate all of the risk. I want you to think about something. I'm going to ask a question. I don't want an answer, but I want you to think about it. Are you 100% sure that had you continued to row out to that woman, which you suggested maybe that was the course you should have taken, are you 100% sure that the outcome would have changed? I'm going to answer the question for you. We'll never know. We'll never know. Even if you had continued to row, there's no guarantee that you would have made it in time. And I'm going to just throw another option on the table. Another option is, what if you continued to row and all of a sudden the shark turns on the boat? You said the shark was bigger than the boat. It was like a submarine. What happens if your boat capsizes and both of you lose your life? Is it a possibility? Sure. But we'll really never know. You know what I do know? I know that the way you think about it matters. What you choose to think matters. Choice is up to you. You can choose to beat up on yourself and overwhelm yourself with guilt if you want. Or you can do what I like to do, which is that great American adage, tomorrow is the first day of the rest of your life. It's a gift. What are you going to do with it? That's a choice. Does this make any sense?
Of course it does. You've given me a lot to think about. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now we're ready for the final phase of the SAFER model. Recovery or referral. Really the goal here is to formulate a follow-up plan. But first you must determine what the needs are. After your intervention, is the individual ready to do what they need to do? Can they perform the activities that they do on a daily basis? Can they perform them adequately? Can they go to school? Can they go to work? Can they provide elder care or child care? Can they take care of themselves? These are the issues that we face. We don't expect to have a complete recovery. We're not trying to make this person happy. We're simply trying to reduce enough of the acute distress so that they can do what they need to do. If they can't, then consideration of how to facilitate access to the next level of care becomes the topic at hand. So, provide some anticipatory guidance. In other words, it's okay to say to someone, by the way, you seem to be doing well, but I expect this to last for a while. It should begin to wane. The symptoms should begin to wane. Follow-up is essential. There is no thing as one-off crisis intervention, except perhaps in disaster situations where that might be an exception. But follow-up is an essential aspect of psychological crisis intervention and of this model. You may actually perform 2 follow-ups or 3 follow-ups. However, if the person needs more than 3, 4, 5 follow-ups, it's probably time to consider moving to some higher level of care. Don't end the conversation with a sense of finality, frustration, or anger. It should end on an upbeat note. It should instill a sense of confidence, a sense of a future orientation, a sense of hope. Let's see how our scenario operationalizes this final phase. So Annie, how you feeling right now?
Better, actually. I'm surprised. I was really stuck. Maybe the light at the end of the tunnel is really a light and not an oncoming train.
It sounds like your sense of humor is coming back, and that's good.
I appreciate your time and reassurance.
Well, it seems to me that I know it's uncomfortable and I know it's distressing, but it seems to me that things are kind of unfolding the way they should, the way we would expect them to unfold, given the incident that you've been through. That having been said, what I'd like to do is reach out to you, let's say this time 2 days from now. I'll give you a call, if that's okay, just to check in. If things are going well, then we can maybe follow up one more time. If things aren't going well or getting worse, there are other things that we can do. But in the interim, if things start to get worse, I'm going to give you my cell phone number, and I'd like you to call me any time of the day or night. It doesn't matter. But what we want to do, and I'll go back to your term, you said you were stuck. We want to get you unstuck. And it's my belief that that's going to happen. Sometimes these things just need to be nudged a little bit. You can reach out and contact me 24/7.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.